Hello, everybody. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. For this episode, we're not going to talk metal so much as we're going to read some metal. This is going to be a book review with a journal review thrown in as a little bonus content. I ordered some stuff recently from the Radical Research podcast. Most folks will be familiar with them. It's Jeff Wagner and Hunter Jin. They have a long-running, excellent podcast that you can look up online. They've got their own website. They've appeared as guests on the Heavy Metallurgy stream with Marty and myself a few times. Both, very intelligent, very fun, and interesting fellows. And they both had things printed and published last year. So I've picked them up and been going through them. And I figured, yeah, let's go ahead and do sort of a book review video. I've done a few of these before. People seem to enjoy them and appreciate them. So happy to do one this time as well. I want to start with the journal that Hunter has published. Now, he hasn't written the entire thing. He's done it with several other people collaborating. It's this called Deserts of Hex. It's kind of a different shape, kind of a small square format. And again, he's referring to it as more of a journal as opposed to a zine. And it just has articles, on different, sort of, deeper musical topics, some of which, have ties into zines, into film and movie and such. I want to read through the table of contents just to give you an idea of the kind of stuff covered. The first one is a band called Acanthus. Some of these I am not familiar with or whatsoever. There's an article on Solifald. There's one on someone named Vladislav Delay. Symbolist Noise, which is Poetics of Sense in the Music of France's Radical Rock and Metal. There's an article called Arcane Archivist, looking at a zine that's put out by someone named Shiver. Then there's an article on Red House Painters. And finally, the closing article is on Devil Doll. So yeah, again, going for some of the much more kind of avant-garde and arcane stuff, written from a very intellectual standpoint in each case. Again, the articles are by different people in some cases; they're not all by Hunter. I've read about half of this so far. Again, most of these topics are not things I am familiar with. Some of it is going a bit over my head, I'll freely admit. But they're well written. Most of the articles are relatively short, so it's not that they go on forever or anything. So you can still work your way through them, and they're not that hard to digest. And it's just an interesting project. I like the way it's put together and assembled. That they're trying to do a very informed, critical study of some of these subjects, even if they're subjects I'm not particularly familiar with. So, if any of that sounded interesting to you, that you'd like to investigate more, you can order Deserts of Hex over on the Radical Research podcast site. If I remember, I will put a link in the show notes down below so you can go check it out. If I remember correctly, this was $11, so not a bad price at all for something. You're not going to find articles like this in a typical zine or on a typical fan website. This definitely is delving into things much deeper and putting a lot of thought into it. So yeah, if it appeals to you, by all means, check it out. All right, on to the actual book we are reviewing. This is Jeff Wagner's Soul on Fire, which is a biography of Peter Steele from Typo Negative and other projects. Now, this is not a new book. This was first published by Jeff back in 2014. This is the third pressing that just got put out late in 2022. It had been out of print for a while and was quite hard to find and pretty expensive if you could find a copy on Amazon or eBay. So Jeff's got it reprinted. You can order it directly from Radical Research. Cover price here is $24.95. So yeah, I was just interested in reading this primarily just because I'm a fan of Jeff's writing style. I've always liked the way he writes articles, books, reviews, and such. I've read his stuff for over 2 decades at this point. He's a very, very good writer, and I enjoy reading his stuff. So, yeah, up front, I'm a fan of Jeff's writing. Also to be clear up front, I'm neither a fan nor a hater of Typo Negative or Peter Steele. I don't really have any strong connection to this band or this individual. There are a lot of people that really worship this band and consider Pete this kind of big deity. There are others who find the band very cheesy and annoying and just write him off. I just don't have much of a relationship with them one way or the other. I never checked out Carnivore, back in the day. And when Typo Negative started blowing up and getting bigger with Bloody Kisses, I just wasn't tuned in at all to what was happening in the popular side of heavy music. At that point, I was very much digging through underground stuff, a lot of death metal stuff. I wasn't watching MTV or anything like that at all. So Hypo Negative showed up, and Christian Women and Black Number One blew up, and I was kind of oblivious to it, to be honest. I of course eventually saw the video a few times and stuff. It didn't really make an impression one way or the other. Like, that's kind of goofy. It's got almost kind of a parody vibe going to it. But it is reasonably heavy and catchy. So it's kind of like, well, okay, whatever. It just wasn't something I was plugged into or attuned to at all. And I've never really checked out their discography much either. I know the hits. I've probably heard one or two albums here or there. I don't know if I've ever owned a studio album by Typo Negative. Maybe I had Bloody Kisses at some point. I don't and haven't for a long time. I know I have the greatest hits. Was it like, the least worst of? I've got that, but just on digital files. It's not something I keep on disc. So all that's to say, I don't come into reading this book with a whole lot of bias about Peter Steele one way or the other. I'm not a drooling fanboy. I'm not a hater. I'm just reading it to learn more about it because it's a band that I kind of missed, even though I was, there at the right time to have, picked up and noticed. I just didn't. So, things to note about the Soul on Fire book. It, of course, is very well written. Jeff is excellent at pacing these kind of books very, very well. He doesn't dwell on any particular period for too long, and he doesn't skip over things. A lot of people, of course, would probably love him to spend, 5 or 6 chapters on just the Bloody Kisses era. But he doesn't do that. He gives it the attention it needs, but then he moves on and gives equal attention to other parts of Peter's life and discography as well. And that works well. It keeps the narrative moving along at a good, steady pace. You don't feel like you're bogged down in, just 1994 for 115 pages, and then you barely find out anything about what came later. Everything's, given its due, which I like quite a bit. It's structured like most biographies are. He goes through, Pete's, childhood, upbringing, what gets him into music early on, early pre-Carnivore projects, covers Carnivore, leading into Typo Negative and such. Very much just kind of following the life and times of the subject, like you would expect most biographies to. Things that are interesting that stand out to me, again, as someone who knew very little about Typo Negative in the first place. Jeff notes, of course, that a lot of people, view Pete, really as this godlike figure. Jeff describes him as this kind of deity or a god among men several times. And it's Jeff showing that he's a huge fan. He had followed Pete's career from early on, and was always very impressed by him. It does strike me as a little funny reading that, to see Jeff, really idolizing the fellow this much. But part of that is just my own, personal hardwiring in the brain. I'm not somebody who is starstruck incredibly easily. It's kind of a cultural trait from the area I grew up. It's been documented in social science projects of, Southern Appalachia for, decades. And that it's an area that doesn't really, people there don't latch on to, star power or, show off egotism things as much as people in other demographics or other areas. people from my area, we would make horrible paparazzi because if we saw someone famous at a restaurant, we would just think, just leave them be. They don't want to talk to us. Let them enjoy their dinner. I'll just sit over here and eat my stuff. We don't make a fuss about folks in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, having, Jeff, really, just, go on and on about, how, huge and intimidating and the great presence and everything of this guy, it just reads kind of quirky to me because it's just like, it's just a man. Okay. I guess he's likable. Obviously, makes a big impression. I get that. But yeah, I just don't react that way to people, or at least very, very rarely. So yeah, it's kind of, different seeing Jeff, really illustrate the fellow that way. Yeah, other things, that stand out, from the book. Jeff obviously documents when Peter early in his career, had made some very kind of inflammatory comments here and there, things that would haunt Typo Negative in their early years, statements that got interpreted as sort of white pride and white supremacy stuff. And he talks about, when the band first went to Europe, they took a lot of heat in a lot of countries with, people even being very violent towards them and, trying to wreck, their bus and their gear at times. And, it's spelled out and documented what he said and why they reacted that way. It does feel like there are times when Jeff is, being almost a little bit apologist about it, that there's this sense of, well, people shouldn't have reacted that way because, they should have understood he was just joking about it. And this reaction was completely uncalled for and hypocritical on their part. And just right on one hand, obviously overreacting to that point where you're trying to throw things and smash up their bus, that's completely uncalled for. That's ridiculously over the top. On the other hand, Jeff, portrays him, very clearly as, Peter's a very intelligent guy, but also a guy who liked to stir the pot up, kind of provoke people, get them riled up intentionally. And as such, I have a little more trouble being sympathetic to the reaction he got from fans in those cases, because if you're knowingly riling people up, it always bugs me when the person then turns around and is just like, dude, I didn't mean it. It's just a joke. Why are you so riled up? Well, they're riled up because you knowingly and intentionally got them riled up. You said something you kind of knew was going to stir up shit. You can't then just turn around and be like, oh, that really smells. Why are you guys making such a shit out of this? Because you provoked them to it. People have to understand, when you say stuff, when you open your mouth, words have repercussions. And if there's one thing that's very clear, it's that lots of people don't get jokes, especially when their only exposure is through an interview they're reading. When they're reading what you say, they can't hear your tone of voice. They can't hear that you're laughing afterwards or that you're using a sarcastic tone or anything like that. There's just words on a page, and a lot of people just take that at face value. It's a tricky thing. People shouldn't overreact as much as they should, but people should be also more mindful of what they say and understand that, if you aren't clear in what's going on and you throw things out there, especially statements that are kind of going to push people's buttons, well, when they, get pissed off at you, you've brought it on yourself to an extent too. So I'm kind of two minds about that. Jeff is kind of working in defense of, Peter, and I get that. And again, he has, definitely grounds to stand on. But, there's, some fault to be placed, on Steele for making those statements. Again, he's an intelligent guy. He knows what he was doing. This isn't a blubbering idiot who just, said something stupid and was oblivious to what was going to happen. So, there's that. Now, of course, over time, Steele, grew up, got more mature, and stopped doing that kind of stuff so much. And we all do that. When we're young and dumb, we all say stupid things sometimes just to get a reaction or to make some noise or just to vent. And yeah, sometimes we have to eat some of those words later on. So I'm not sitting here complaining about Steele saying those kind of things. I just like, yeah, when you say dumb things, sometimes they do come back to haunt you, and that is partly your fault. Moving on through his career, it's an interesting trajectory that, again, I didn't know much about. Obviously, the band got very big for a period and did very well. There's always been this mythos around Peter that he didn't always want all that stuff. He just wanted to keep his parks and recreation job for New York City, working at the city parks and all that kind of stuff. And Jeff goes through that, that he was very kind of torn about what to do. And in the one hand, this job offered something he wanted a lot, which was just kind of long-term security, a steady routine. It was a guaranteed pension. It was kind of what he was brought up to look for and try to attain. And then there was this other artistic side that was kind of pulling him another way, and offering sort of fame and fortune and rock star status, which wasn't something he really aspired to. But at the same time, he spent a lot of time and a lot of years plugging away at the music industry with different bands and trying to make something of it. So, there was a part of him that did want that too. One of the big narratives from the book, and spoiler alerts here for folks that maybe aren't familiar with his full life story, it also becomes a bit of a cautionary tale. And now Peter Steele was not one of these people who got all this money and fame and fortune and then went out and immediately blew it on mansions and jets and 15 different Rolls Royces made out of solid gold platinum or something, and then lost it all. But he did lose it all at the same time. If anything, he didn't take it seriously enough in the other direction, that he just kind of wanted to still live in the basement of his mom and dad's house. He never really moved out until he was forced out later on. He wasn't buying tons of fancy cars. He was buying expensive gifts just for other people, people he had grown up with, neighbors, helping them with things. So he was very generous in those ways. But in the end, he squandered this fortune just as badly as someone who had gone out and bought 100 fancy bottles of bourbon for $1 million each and then poured them all down the sink or something. Pete's money, some of it went up his nose by his own admission, and the rest of it got frittered away just here and there. He had people taking advantage of him, as is prone to happen to folks in this kind of thing. So it's this kind of weird, again, there's kind of a weird dichotomy here. This was somebody who was very much attuned to the idea of, let's just get this long-term security, set things up, have a good stable life, working towards that pension after 30 years of service. That appealed to him. But yet, when he was offered, here's this big pot of money, you're now set for life, you've got this gives you all the long-term security you want, he couldn't handle it. And it was in a different manner than how most rock stars tend to lose it all. But the bottom line was, he still lost it all. He still couldn't keep it together and figure out, how to control that. And it's even a little bit, more, worthy of sympathy, because, Jeff documents in here very clearly, Peter still had, a lot of issues with mental health. But one trait, he always had with his music and such was that, he was, very much in control of everything, even very small details. He micromanaged them, kind of, very anal retentive, OCD type personality, it seems. And so, he had, complete control over all this artistic stuff. But then when it came to, the financial side, like, here's your money and all your stuff, and it just kind of like out the door. And even though he wanted that long-term security, he didn't realize he had it, and as such, he lost it. Which, it's a sad kind of ending. By towards the end of his life, he'd been forced to move out of his parents' house, by the rest of his family. He's living in an apartment, not even in New York, trying to put the pieces back together, and was gaining momentum when he unfortunately passed away. So it's definitely the cautionary tale of not necessarily be careful of what you wish for, but even when you're trying to remain humble about it and remember where you came from and still be a part of that, you can still mess it up pretty bad. Um, and I guess it kind of leads you into the last big impression from the book is simply that Jeff does a really great job of showing that there were a lot of sides to Peter's personality and that he was a complex person, that he wasn't just this, 6'8" gothic god of a man with a schlong the size of a telephone pole. And that he wasn't just this, neurotic, detail obsessed guy in a studio. And he wasn't just, this guy, running around snorting too much coke and, fucking too many groupies. That he's all of those things, but he's also the extremely nice and polite neighbor that everybody in the neighborhood knew as being extremely kind and generous and kind of soft spoken. The bottom line is he paints, the picture of, a more complete image of what the person was like, not just one facet of the person. And I think there's something important there for everybody to remember is that most people are that way. And we're bad to forget that most people are not just one thing, that there are lots of things, but we don't see that. Very recently, I was, eating in a campus cafeteria, just grabbing some lunch, and it just, you always pick up snippets of student conversations from tables nearby. And, there were two, female students talking. I just, catch this one snippet where one of them saying like, yeah, I saw my English professor, out at so-and-so the other day. It's like, it always throws me so much. I always forget my professors actually have lives. And, it seems like such a dumb thing to say, but it's very much true. It's something I do every semester on the very first day of class is I show the students family pictures. I'm like, look, yes, I'm a geologist. Yes, I'm here, to teach you this semester, but, look, I don't just stand in this classroom for the next 4 months waiting for you guys to trudge in here every other morning so I can talk to you about geology for 75 minutes. I have a wife. I have a kid. I have friends and hobbies and obligations that have absolutely nothing to do with you or this job or this campus. I have a lot of other parts to my life as well that you need to be aware of. That I'm not here just to be your stand-up robotic professor. People forget that we always want to put people in very simple boxes. Oh, that guy is just a conservative redneck idiot jerk, or oh, that guy's just stuck up white collar elitist bleeding heart pussy liberal or something. They may be that in part, but they're also other things. They're not acting like a redneck jerk to everyone. They may take very good care of their family and friends. They're not being an elitist snob to everyone they meet. They may actually have a very good sense of humor, but there are some things that are just lines they don't want to cross when it comes to joking around. People are complex, and we'd probably all be in a little better place as a society if we could remember that instead of constantly wanting to pigeonhole people into just one little very narrow little box based on our very limited interactions with that person or our very limited perceptions of what that person is like. And I think that's something that you come away at the end of this book with. You, if nothing else, whether you like him, dislike him, love their music, can't stand their music, Soul on Fire definitely gives you a somewhat complete picture of Peter Steele. I'm not going to say a complete picture, but you get the idea that, there are contradictory things about his personality, that he's one thing to some people, he's something very different to other people. And that's okay. That's normal. That's very human because he is a human. But he's not just the guy on, the black #1 video that all the girls went crazy for. And, he's not just, the crazy guy in Carnivore wearing, furs and skins and, making, kind of inflammatory, obscene remarks about things either. He was lots of things to lots of different people. And other people fit that bill too. So yeah, at the end of the day, very good read. It's interesting. It gets you thinking about different things besides just, what color to dye your hair for Halloween this year. And that's enough about the book. If you're interested, again, you can order this third printing directly from the Radical Research podcast website. Very good read, definitely worth the money. I'd highly recommend it, whether or not you're into the band. And that is going to do it. So now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What do you think of this book if you're familiar with it? Did you come away with different impressions? Were there parts of it that you liked or didn't like? If you've read Desert of Hex, what were some of the things that you were interested in? Yeah, again, a lot of these topics are brand new to me. There's only 2 or 3 of them I'm the least bit familiar with. So people might be interested to know more about those topics as well. And have you read anything else interesting lately? We're living in a time when a lot of books are coming out about the hard rock and heavy metal that we grew up on. And it's kind of nice to be able to go pick those up and read a little bit about it, learn some of the stuff that you missed, and just see it from a different perspective. So if you've come across any good heavy metal or hard rock reading material lately, leave a comment down below so other folks maybe can go check it out too. All right, that is going to do it for this time. So until next time, everybody take care. As always, read a book and bang your head. We can do both. Maybe not at the same time. That might not work so good.